welcome to our interview with the speaker series for the United Astrology Conference 2026. I'm Melissa, and today we are joined by astrologer Cori Anne Adams. Cori Anne, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Cori Anne. I am a practicing astrologer. My work primarily consists of consultation, one-on-one with clients, teaching, and writing. Um, I have been studying astrology for a little over 10 years now. My journey with astrology began on the extremely scholarly website www.cafeastrology.com,
Yes,
um,
yes.
where I found my whole birth chart and really just went into the rabbit hole. And it was kind of one of those moments that just lit me up with everything that kind of feeling seen in a more nuanced way than I had ever felt like I'd been seen before. And so, of course, astrology being the rabbit hole that it is, I was very voracious to learn more. I kind of had a very immediate feeling of like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to facilitate the feeling that I'm having right now for other people by showing them this. And that was in my very early 20s at a point in time where I was very unfocused. So my journey has been a lot of ebbing and flowing over the years. And I have, I started practicing professionally or putting myself on that trajectory to kind of build a public facing practice about 4 years ago.
Nice.
And yeah, and it's been such a challenging but rewarding journey. And I think one of the things that I've really kind of pivoted in my practice and my studies and my practice, both publicly and privately, more towards Hellenistic and traditional astrology. I'm deeply interested in the history of astrology in general,
Mhm.
and kind of find myself more and more drawn towards understanding the way that techniques and traditions and perspectives have developed over time and using that to kind of frame my own work, and the way that I interact with astrology, um, both individually and on a more internal personal level, as well as kind of looking at the world around me and orienting into the world around me. So yeah.
That's all really interesting. Okay, I do want to talk about what is it about the history of astrology that you're really focused on or is really like intriguing to you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really pulled me into traditional astrology specifically is that I have like very much have a lifelong interest in ancient culture and ancient
Mm.
civilization. Like I was definitely one of those like mythology kids in elementary school. I was very into I've just always even like I wasn't raised super religious, but I did go to church as a kid, and even this idea of like what the world was like in these biblical times of these stories that I was hearing in like Sunday school and stuff like that has always been something of strong fascination with me. And and I even studied classics in college as well. And so kind of pulling on that thread of astrology as, research has kind of been progressing further and further, and pulling us back further and further and understanding kind of the origins of these techniques and these kind of translations of texts as they were written. It's something that really fascinates me. And I think the kind of to get more directly into the question you specifically asked, I think that it really does tie to this interest in kind of exploring the and constructing an idea of the way that people interfaced with and interacted with mundane life, day-to-day
Mhm.
life, spirituality, and kind of all these components of life that people were kind of moving through on a day-to-day basis, and how astrology kind of reflects that, and what understanding astrology can kind of and the history of it can kind of feed into this like understanding of the similarities of how life today is and isn't like life thousands of years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Definitely. I think find myself particularly interested in that, like the ancient Mesopotamian, like Babylonian astrology and Hellenistic era as
Nice.
well.
Nice. I also
Yeah,
feel like when you study the history, you can understand the root of like when you were reading the ancient texts of like what certain things end up meaning, which can be really enlightening for lack of a better word. Um,
totally.
um, so you've been studying now, you said for about 10 years. That is pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, I should say. Um, have you noticed a big difference in the like astrological community, kind of like pre and post, like, BC before COVID,
Being,
AC? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I think that the COVID era and especially like the lockdown era really brought this shift and emphasis. And I think this goes beyond the world of astrology, but I think I relate to it. We all probably relate to it mostly through the lens of astrology, but brought this huge shift into online communities.
Hmm.
And I think that astrology was definitely on a big rise in like popular zeitgeist and in younger crowds. But I feel like that shift that happened around COVID gave people community to like study around and learn together and like join together. Um, like what comes up mind to me immediately is like Aliza Kelly's online community is like massive, and like that kind of really grew in that time and gave people space to feel like they were in community when it was hard to feel that way. Um, and I think that people were also kind of really just turning to being online a lot more as a means of um, expressing themselves and exploring things that they were interested in and connecting with people and um, people giving readings online and people kind of connecting with one another um, through that and in groups is definitely something that saw a massive shift. And I think people also had time to
Yeah.
be home and like learn and engage the material in a way that they hadn't previously. And I mean, I think that kind of also marks for me when I started really pivoting towards more like traditional astrology. And I think that a part of that does kind of relate to that idea of like having time to like
Hmm.
really engage thoughtfully with these kind of concepts that were maybe previously a little bit more difficult to like wrap my head around or kind of connect to.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you first started studying astrology, you mentioned cafe astrology, which been there.
Yeah.
What was it that led to you, like not necessarily led you to cafe astrology, but like led you to astrology?
Yeah. I really wish that I had a better answer for this than I do, because the answer is like I kind of don't remember. Like I don't really remember exactly like what like brought me to it. But I just remember the feeling I got when I was reading about my full chart. I do know I had recently graduated from college and I was living with I had moved back in with my parents because I just kind of never like had the foresight or like forethought to like figure out what I wanted to do after college. And so it very much was this era moment in my life where I was like, okay, I'm like back in this place where I don't want to be.
Mm,
uh didn't really want to like return to my hometown, and felt like I was like, okay, like I just got this degree, like what do I do with it now? I'm not really doing anything. And like you know what do I want out of life from here? Like what do I want to be doing? And um I I don't know, I must have just been on some internet rabbit hole or something, or like
mm,
maybe it was even had heard it mentioned and was like, oh, like I have a whole birth chart. Like, what does that mean? And
mhm.
yeah, but I do think that contextualizing into this idea of like being at a pivotal moment or like a very transitional moment and kind of trying to figure out what's next is like a very par for the course kind of context of people finding astrology as a
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so then, we've kind of caught up then in this little mini timeline we're creating. Next year, we're having UAC, and this will be the first UAC since before lockdown. So, have you been to a conference before?
No. Well, I attended Astromagia
Hmm.
online, and it was the first one, I believe, that they had put on, and I think it was only online. Like, I don't think there was
Hmm.
any in-person component, if I'm remembering correctly. But I've never gotten to attend an in-person conference, so I'm very excited.
Nice, nice. Okay, so like what are you hoping for first of all for your first like in-person conference?
Oh my God. What am I hoping for? So much
Big
that is
question, big
also
question, yeah.
like yeah, that I also know and I think on many levels can expect to happen. But I think what immediately comes to my mind is to build more community and
Mm,
meet people and connect with people. And I think as you know, kind of going back to the timeline we've kind of laid out around my own journey with astrology, I think even if like prior to COVID and prior to kind of starting to get serious about wanting to be um, serious about the role that astrology plays in my life and wanting it to play a bigger role in my life, especially professionally. Prior to that, like I really didn't have a lot of like connection with people around astrology. Um, Beyond kind of people casually like I did live in Asheville, North Carolina, which if you're like familiar, it's a very like artsy kind of woo
nice,
place.
nice.
So
Yeah.
there was kind of like a casual like um in that sense presence of astrology, but not kind of like a disciplined
Hmm.
uh like tradition of study there or like a like that kind of outlet. And so I feel like I have not really by the time I like was really starting to study seriously, I think everything was really happening online, and I haven't really gotten the opportunity to really build connections in person with people that kind of have a similar, I guess, nerdiness about astrology that
Yeah,
I do, that are
yeah.
like that are going to sit there and like nerd out over like the technique or the history or like these this or that component. And so I'm really excited about that, and I am just really excited to be in the presence of the elders of
Mm.
this community in this world and soak their knowledge up and their wisdom and the people who have kind of been doing really important work over the last like decade, several decades really for some of
Yeah.
them. So yeah,
Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. Um, I will say this is gonna be huge. So it's definitely a big one to
yeah,
do as your first in-person conference. Props to
yeah.
you. Yeah. Okay, I kind of want to go back, pardon me. I kind of want to go back to the astrology, the way you practice, because you're influenced by very, very ancient techniques and the histories. How are you bringing that into consultation?
Yeah, I think that I you know, it's a funny line, I think, to walk when you're kind of very dedicated to the more like traditional interpretations and techniques, because I think that most people that you kind of like sit in consultation with, and very broadly, generally, kind of don't have that level of understanding of astrology, and it's a really interesting kind of thing to navigate when you're using these more complex techniques, but also trying to bring it down to a level where someone who maybe just has like a, you know, maybe understands their whole chart, kind of has a level of fluency in like the language as far as like planets and signs and houses and stuff, um, kind of bringing it down to a level that can be very digestible to someone who maybe kind of primarily understands maybe how transits work or like how their chart works. And so I think that for me, kind of taking these kind of more complex techniques and making them relatable in a way that anyone at any level can understand really looks like bringing people into a rhythm of like their seasons of life
Mm.
and where they are at in the moment. One of the things I really like to focus on is like planetary allyship, like who's on your side right now, you
Hmm.
know, which might look like looking at that person's time lord for whatever their perfected house is of the year. It's like, hey, this person is, or this planet is like really working hard with getting your attention right now. And so like this is going to be more sensitive. Or um I think an example that would be especially relevant is utilizing zodiacal releasing, which is extremely complex and like
Yes.
not really something that like the even people that are a little bit more advanced in their understanding of astrology might not even understand. However, when I'm doing any sort of like transit consultation or like a consultation around like what someone's experiencing in a moment, I always look at that, and that very much to me looks like kind of looking at that season of the person's life and whether they're
Hmm.
in a moment of really building up into something important or whether they're kind of winding down from something intense and integrating and kind of carrying something through. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So I like the way that you're kind of talking about these like the almost personifying the planets, which I think is definitely like a draw from those ancient techniques or like historical precedent being set there. As inescapable as it is because we're living in 2025, how do you work in terms of like, I guess, modernizing things where necessary or where you feel necessary, or how do you feel like you balance that?
Yeah, that is that is an interesting one. I think that meeting people where they're at is a big thing, like kind of meeting people where their level of understanding of astrology is really important, and that's something I try to like lay the groundwork for every like client session I do is kind of like um developing some sort of understanding with where people's like level of understanding of astrology is before the session even starts, like on an intake form. Um so that I can kind of translate it into something that they might relate to. Um, but I think like this idea of like modernizing something that I guess at times can like almost feel a little fatalistic or like have
Mhm.
like these kind of like more uh connotations that can be a little bit more challenging for our contemporary brains and hearts and minds is, you know, kind of making sure to really take a nuanced look at things and really like I almost sometimes I even almost like to kind of neutralize the planets rather than kind of like looking at them as like okay like a benefic is this is good or malefic is going to be like something terrible, but more kind of trying to take this neutral stance of like okay well if we have a Jupiter transit coming up like what's already going on here and what is being magnified to a bigger proportion to kind of then use as a jumping off point to like what's asking to grow within you or in your life. Or similarly with Saturn transits, like, you know, rather than kind of taking that rather melancholic and gloomy stance, kind of looking at like, okay, like this might not be easy, but here's what we stand to, you know, the maturation that stands to happen through moving through this process, or you know like kind of trying
Nice.
to look at things from the perspective of like well what do especially with the malefics like okay what do we want it to look like on the other side of this and how can that be centered as you move through the more challenging components of what's going on here.
Nice, nice. I love that. I love that. Thank you.
Thanks.
But
Yeah.
we're right about at our time, so where can viewers find more about you?
You can find me. My website is www.coriannastro.com, CoriAnneastro, which is kind of the central hub. I publish a weekly forecast to Substack every week as well, which is linked through my website. It's probably the easiest way to find that, but it's witchatthecrossroads.substack.com, and my Instagram handle is at the witch at the crossroads, which is unnecessarily long, but it's spelled exactly the way that it sounds. So
All right, well, I will pop all of that below. And if viewers want to find any more about Cori Anne or about any of the other speakers for UAC, then you can head over to uacastrology.com. But otherwise, thank you for joining us today, Cori Anne.
thank you so much for having me. This
Yep.
has been a pleasure.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find new episodes on our channel every Monday and Wednesday, continuing through to the United Astrology Conference in 2026. We also invite you to attend UAC 2026, taking place in Chicago, Illinois from September 3rd to the 9th. As the largest astrological conference in the world, UAC offers an unparalleled opportunity to deepen your astrological studies and connect with a global community. With over 270 lectures, more than 180 esteemed speakers, and 1,500 attendees, this gathering is a cornerstone event for both seasoned professionals and dedicated students of astrology. For details on registration, scholarships, volunteer opportunities, or advertising, please visit uacastrology.com or refer to the links in the description box below.